He came home wearing medals: the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal, the Presidential Unit Citation. He came home as a combat veteran who had flown into enemy fire when every powerful person in America had told him he didn't have to. He came home having done something real, something dangerous, something that could have killed him on any one of 5 different days over occupied Europe. He came home, and nobody in Hollywood knew what to do with him. Because the man who had left in 1942, the one with the laughing eyes and the easy confidence and the unshakable magnetism that filled every room he entered, that man had not come back. What returned wore his face. What returned had his voice, his build, his professional habits. What returned could still find the mark and say the lines and carry a scene with the kind of effortless authority that most actors spend their entire careers chasing. But Clark Gable was gone, and the ghost that walked through the next 16 years of his life was searching for something it would never find again. This is episode 5. This is what victory looks like when everything that mattered to you is already buried in a mountain in Nevada. August 1944. Clark Gable stepped off the transport and back onto American soil for the first time in nearly 2 years. He was 43 years old. He had flown 5 combat missions over Nazi Germany as a waist gunner in a B-17 Flying Fortress, sitting in the open midsection of a roaring bomber at 20,000 feet, while German fighters tried to kill him and flak tore through the fuselage close enough to feel the heat. He had done it voluntarily. He had done it while the United States Army Air Forces repeatedly tried to pull him from combat duty because losing Clark Gable over Germany would have been a propaganda catastrophe that no military commander wanted on his record. He had refused to stop flying. The Army gave him his medals and his honorable discharge and a handshake, and Clark Gable returned to a world that expected him to be exactly who he had been before the war. MGM was waiting. Louis B. Mayer, the most powerful studio executive in Hollywood, the man who had built Gable into the king of Hollywood and owned his contract like a piece of real estate, had been patient through the war years. He had let his biggest male star go. He had waited. Now Mayer wanted his asset back. The romantic comedies, the adventure pictures, the leading man whose presence alone guaranteed a certain kind of audience, the star who sold tickets by the millions. Mayer wanted Clark Gable, king of Hollywood. What he had was a man who slept with a loaded pistol on his nightstand. What he had was a man who woke in the small hours screaming from dreams he refused to describe to anyone. A man who had developed a relationship with whiskey that had nothing to do with celebration and everything to do with silence. The bottle was not for parties anymore. The bottle was for getting through the nights when the combat memories surfaced, and the absence of Carole Lombard became a physical pressure in the chest, and the world's cheerful insistence that he perform happiness felt like a cruelty he had done nothing to deserve. The studios did not have language for what Gable was carrying in 1944. The concept of combat trauma, what would eventually be called post-traumatic stress, was not a part of the cultural conversation. What soldiers felt when they came home was expected to stay home, buried under civilian life and forward momentum and the simple fact of having survived when others had not. Men were expected to absorb what the war had done to them and get on with things. Clark Gable got on with things. He showed up. He did the work. He behaved professionally on set, treated the crew with respect, never threw tantrums, never made demands. By every external measure, he was a model of what a returning veteran should look like. But the man behind the performance had been emptied of something essential, and no amount of craft could fill it back up. What does a king do when his kingdom feels like a cage? Adventure. 1945. Clark Gable's return to the screen. MGM promoted it with a tagline that must have felt to Gable himself like a particular kind of mockery. Gable's back and Garson's got him. The studio machine turned, the posters went up, the publicity machine ran as it always had, and audiences went to see it. The film was mediocre. The performance was professional. The box office was disappointing in ways that made studio accountants look at each other with quiet concern. It was the first concrete sign that something had shifted. The audiences who had loved the old Gable, the roguish, electric, casually dangerous Gable of It Happened One Night and Gone with the Wind and Red Dust, those audiences could feel the absence of something they could not name. The warmth was gone. The mischief was gone. The quality that had always made Gable feel like a man who was secretly delighted by life, who regarded the camera with something close to affection, who made the audience feel that standing in a room with him would be the best part of their day. That quality had not made the return trip from England. What remained was craft, and craft is not the same as joy. Over the next 8 years, Gable moved through film after film with the steady, joyless efficiency of a man fulfilling contractual obligations. The Hucksters in 1947, a cynical look at the advertising industry that matched his mood better than MGM intended, and one of the more honest performances he gave in the post-war years. Command Decision in 1948, a war picture set in the very world he had just left, that gave him material he understood in his bones in ways the director never fully appreciated. Any Number Can Play in 1949. Key to the City in 1950, a light comedy that asked him to be charming and breezy on cue, and he delivered it, because that was the job. Across the Wide Missouri in 1951, shot on location in the Colorado Rockies, which at least gave him open sky and distance from the studio's fluorescent hallways. Mogambo in 1953, a remake of Red Dust, one of his early successes set in Africa as if the studio believed that repeating old formulas might retrieve the old man inside the aging one. It was a moderate hit. Ava Gardner was incandescent in it. Gable was competent and tired. He worked. He showed up on time. He was courteous to crew members and patient with directors and never created the kind of on-set drama that plagued other stars of his magnitude. He gave every production exactly what it needed and nothing more. And every performance carried the faint, unmistakable quality of a man going through motions he had long since stopped believing in. The critics noticed. The audiences noticed, even if they couldn't articulate what they were sensing. The box office receipts told the story in the clearest language available to Hollywood. Gable was no longer guaranteed. He was still a draw, still a name that meant something. But the days of automatic blockbusters were over, and both he and MGM understood that the golden era of their partnership had ended somewhere over Germany in 1943. What neither side said aloud was the simpler truth underneath the box office numbers. Clark Gable had been the king of Hollywood because the king of Hollywood had been alive. The man who came back from the war was doing an extremely accomplished impression of that man, but impressions, however skilled, eventually wear thin. He tried to find what he had lost in the arms of other women. He tried twice. He never came close. In 1949, Clark Gable married Lady Sylvia Ashley. She was British aristocracy, glamorous, socially accomplished, the kind of woman who moved through rooms with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her own position in the world. By every conventional measure, she was an appropriate match for one of Hollywood's most famous men. The press covered the wedding with enthusiasm. America watched and hoped. Lady Sylvia Ashley was not Carole Lombard. Nobody was. Nobody could be. But Gable was 48 years old, and the loneliness had become a physical weight, and he had allowed himself to believe, or had tried hard enough to almost believe, that a new commitment might finally loosen grief's long grip on him. It did not. The marriage lasted 2 years. Those close to the couple described not a passionate conflict, but something quieter and more final. A fundamental incompatibility that had nothing to do with personality differences and everything to do with the fact that Gable was not actually present in the relationship. He was there physically, he attended the social functions and maintained the household and behaved with the surface courtesy that had always been part of his character. But his attention was elsewhere. His emotional energy was spoken for. Lady Sylvia Ashley had married Clark Gable, the public figure. What she lived with was a man whose interior life had been occupied by a ghost for the better part of a decade. They divorced in 1952. The years that followed were lived quietly and not particularly happily. Gable spent increasing time away from the film industry, hunting in the Sierra Nevada, fishing in Oregon, driving through the desert landscapes of the American Southwest that appealed to him in ways he could not entirely explain. Wide open space, distance from crowds, the opportunity to be Clark Gable the man rather than Clark Gable the celebrity, even if the man was not in especially good condition. The drinking was steady now, not spectacular. He was not falling down in restaurants or making scenes at parties, but steady in the way that becomes a new normal, a daily recalibration of pain levels, a managed relationship with numbness. The pistol stayed on the nightstand. The nightmares stayed. The friends who knew him best in these years described a man who had become very good at appearing fine while being something considerably less than fine. In 1955, he married Kay Williams Spreckles. Kay was different. She was a woman of genuine warmth and considerable intelligence who had known Gable for years and had no illusions about what she was walking into. She understood that Carole Lombard's absence defined him. She did not try to compete with a ghost or demand that he love her the way he had loved the woman who died in 1942. She simply offered what she could offer: companionship, steadiness, the particular grace of someone who has decided to love a damaged person without insisting that they be repaired first. By the accounts of those who observed the marriage closely, Kay came closer to reaching him than anyone had since Carole. The house near Encino was calmer. The social appearances were less visibly strained. Gable laughed more, or something that looked enough like laughter to count, but the nightmares did not stop. The whiskey did not leave the nightstand. And in the quiet hours of Nevada nights, when the desert silence pressed in from all sides, the hollow place at the center of Clark Gable's life, a place shaped exactly like Carole Lombard, fitted precisely to her dimensions, remained as it had always been: empty, permanent, beyond the reach of any comfort another person could offer. The studio that made him a king finally let him go, and the freedom felt like the floor giving way. In 1954, after more than 2 decades, Clark Gable's contract with MGM ended. For 23 years, MGM had owned him in every practical sense. They had built him from a promising stage actor into the biggest male star in Hollywood, had shaped his image, decided his films, managed his scandals, controlled the version of Clark Gable that the world was permitted to see. The contract had been a cage, but it had also been a structure, a daily framework that told him where to be and what to do, and gave his years a logic that had nothing to do with what he was feeling inside. When the contract ended, Gable was suddenly independent in an industry that was changing faster than he could adapt to. Television was reshaping the entertainment landscape in ways that alarmed the old studio system. Audiences that had reliably filled theaters in the 1930s and 40s were staying home, watching small screens in their living rooms, and the studios were scrambling to compete with bigger spectacles and wider formats. The intimate romantic comedies and character-driven dramas that had built Gable's career were giving way to something louder and larger. The world that had made him a king was receding. He worked as an independent for the next 6 years. Some of the films were better than his late MGM work. Freed from the studio's formulaic insistence, he occasionally found material that asked something genuine from him. Teacher's Pet in 1958 showed the old electricity in brief, convincing flashes, a comedy that let him play against Doris Day with something approaching actual pleasure. Critics noted that when the writing was sharp enough, something of the old Gable surfaced, recognizable and alive. The charisma still there underneath the ears, but the writing was rarely that sharp, and more often Gable moved through westerns and adventure pictures that needed his name on the poster more than they needed anything particular from him as a performer. He collected his fees and drove back to the ranch property in Encino, and spent his evenings doing what he had done for over a decade: enduring. He was 58 years old in 1959. He had been famous for 30 years. He had survived a world war and outlasted a broken heart and tried, with genuine effort, to construct something worth calling a life from the rubble of what January 1942 had left him. He had managed it after a fashion. He was not destroyed. He was functional. He had a wife who loved him and a career that still generated income and enough of a public reputation that his name still meant something. He was also, in ways that only he fully understood, exhausted. He was a man who had been waiting for something for a very long time. He could not have told you exactly what. But the waiting had a quality to it, a patient, unhurried quality, that suggested he was not in any particular hurry for it to end one way rather than another. Then came a script unlike anything he had been handed in 20 years. And something in Clark Gable woke up. In 1959, Arthur Miller, one of the most celebrated American writers of the century, whose plays had changed what serious drama looked like on the American stage, completed a screenplay he had written as a gift for his wife, Marilyn Monroe. A Nevada story about broken people and vanishing landscapes and men who had been built for a world that no longer existed. John Huston, one of the most gifted directors in American film history, was attached. The character Miller had written was named Gay Langland, an aging Nevada cowboy, a man of skill and principle and genuine code in a country that had moved past the point where skill and principle and code counted for very much. A man who kept moving not because he had a direction, but because stopping meant confronting the full weight of everything he carried. A man out of time, still applying the values of a vanished world to a present that had no use for them. When Gable read the script, something in him recognized something in it. He agreed to do the picture. Those who knew him in the months leading up to production described a quality in him that was difficult to categorize. He was engaged, genuinely, visibly interested in the role in ways that he had not been interested in a film in years. He asked questions about the character. He thought carefully about the physical demands of the part. There was something almost eager in his approach, which was unusual enough that people noticed. But alongside the engagement was something else, a stillness, a sense that Gable understood this picture in a way that went beyond professional calculation. As if the Misfits was not simply his next job, but something that he had been waiting, without knowing it, to do. The location was Nevada. The same vast desert landscapes, the same hard sky, the same distances that went on forever in every direction, unbroken, indifferent, beautiful in the way that only completely empty places can be beautiful. The same territory where, 18 years earlier, a TWA constellation had gone into a mountain and taken Carole Lombard with it. Clark Gable packed his bags in the summer of 1960 and drove toward it. He did not bring a stunt double. He did not intend to need one. What happened in the Nevada desert over the summer and fall of 1960 would complete something that had begun on a January night in 1942. Gable rode horses in brutal heat under a sun that had no sympathy for a 59-year-old man with a history of combat stress and heavy drinking and nearly 2 decades of grief carried like ballast in the chest. He wrestled with ropes and wild stallions and the kind of physical work that younger men in good health would have found demanding. He did it himself, take after take, day after day. When crew members asked why he refused a double, he did not offer a particularly detailed answer. He said he was fine. He said he didn't mind the work. He said, and those who heard it remembered it, though they didn't understand it fully until later, that he had been waiting for a long time, and that he didn't mind waiting a little longer. Next episode, the filming, the collapse, the last words he ever spoke about the woman he had never stopped loving, and the final wish of the King of Hollywood's. Written into his will, waiting to be honored, he asked to be buried next to her. Next episode, episode 6, The Misfits Chasing Death. 2 broken legends, 1 Nevada desert, 1 last story to tell.